Avery is going to talk to us about security and intrusion prevention and detection. This is, at last year's conference, this was a huge topic, and this is becoming more and more of what we do, not just as Apple technologists, but as consultants in the technology field in general. You're going to just continue to need more and more of this information. So I'm looking forward to what Avery has to say. Avery, welcome.
Thank you.
Everybody, a big warm welcome to Avery.
Everybody hear me okay? Yeah, it's running. All right. So this morning we are going to talk about the basics of security and our responses to it, as well as a lot of preparation, because the reality is these days it's not a matter of if you're going to be a target of an attack, it's a matter of when and how long it's going to take. So by a show of hands, who has had an experience already with an intrusion on their network or a data breach, data integrity, anything of that nature? Okay, those of you that don't, keep your hands up if you had your hands up already. Those of you that don't have your hands up are currently, take a look at around the room and look at how many people have their hands up here. And this is where we're going with this, that if you look at those numbers and you're not one of the people with your hands up, it is just a matter of time. It's going to happen. And the way we deal with it right from the start, we'll skip who I am, we already did that, is we prepare properly with it and we have a plan. Those of you that were in my presentation on the first day, we talked a lot about planning and ensuring we're ready for something to happen. By being ready for something to happen, we change something from being an emergency situation to an inconvenience. So if we have proper backups, a malware attack or a ransomware attack isn't really an issue. Because then what we're looking at is how long it takes us to restore, as opposed to how we deal with the fact that suddenly somebody wants $1 million in order for us to have our data. So we're going to talk about a few things today over the course of the next 40 some odd minutes. We're going to talk about limiting our exposure to those attacks. We're going to talk about the difference between IDS and IDP, or that should say IPS as opposed to IDS. So we're going to talk about IDS and IPS systems. Who here by show of hands already has some familiarity with what those are? Okay. Those of you that don't, we're going to talk about it, and you're going to learn what they are. We're going to talk about honeypot networks, honeypots and honeypot networks. We're going to talk about our initial response to intrusions when we see them. We're going to talk about threat indicators, which are things that allow us to know that something's going to occur. We're going to talk about the highest level of security problems we have, and that is the human element that goes with it. Computers generally don't break themselves. Networks don't break themselves. It happens because of our interaction with them. And then we're going to talk about post-incident briefings, because anytime something happens, we need to have a briefing afterwards to figure out not only what happened and how it occurred, but how we're going to prevent it from happening again. So right off the bat, those of you that have cell phones on you, which I imagine is absolutely everybody, please put them on silent, put the mute button on your laptop, so on and so forth. So in regards to limiting our exposure, one of the things that I hear a lot of people say is there's nothing special about me. So why am I going to be a target of it? When we look at limiting our exposure, what we're talking about is we're not making things easy to have us be a target for the situation. It's kind of like the situation when we park our car in a parking lot. How many of you lock your car? Okay, most of us. Does it really do any good for somebody that wants to steal your vehicle if we lock the car? No. They can easily take a brick and throw it through the window, locks are bypassed. But when it's parked next to another car that is unlocked, it becomes which one's the easier target. There's two types of security breaches that happen these days. One is targeted, meaning we have chosen you, by we I mean the community of internet people that do bad things, have chosen you as a specific target, and they will do everything they possibly can to get into your system. When that is the case, the vast majority of times, it's not a matter of if they're going to get in, it's a matter of how long it takes and what resources they have to expend to do it. The other type of attack, which is the more common one these days, is the one where it's a matter of convenience. In the industry, they're called script kiddies. They download things from the internet. It's where most of your phishing attacks come from and things like that. It goes to absolutely everybody out there. Who here has gotten an email from a bank that you don't have an account with saying that your account's been locked up? Okay, I get an email from PayPal every single day saying my account has been restricted. The really funny part about that is I don't have a PayPal account. So there's no way my account's been restricted for an account that I don't have. The reason I get those all the time is because somebody went and downloaded a script that takes every single email they can find and sends it to absolutely everybody. And the reason this happens is very simple. Out of everybody in this room, statistically speaking, 1 in 20 of you will fall for it and end up responding. And if 1 in 20 of you respond, then it's a thing that's worth doing. How many of you have been in the situation where you've been the person that inadvertently clicks the link and gives your information? Okay, nobody? I'll be the first one to raise my hand on that because I have. I get super busy. I get an email that says my Netflix account credit card information has expired. Reasonable thing. I immediately click the link, update my information. I get confused at first because my keychain password doesn't automatically fill in. And then right after I send my credit card information, I go, wait a minute, this is wrong, that shouldn't have happened. That falls into the human element side of things. All of these are things when, for the Netflix side of things, it's not that big of a deal. When it's your internal network and it's guarding all the data inside of your network and all the private information on your machine, it becomes an issue. So with the first thing for limiting exposure, we have our public visibility. Anybody want to tell me what public visibility means?
How available your externally facing services are to other folks.
Okay. That's one aspect of it. So the first side, as he said, is if we're running servers, how exposed are we to the outside? The second part of it is how many of you have social media accounts? Show of hands, social media accounts. Those of you that don't have your hand up, I wish I could be you and say that I don't have one and I have no exposure on Facebook or anything like that. If we look at a lot of the security questions that come with our different services and even the ones that we personally use on our servers to protect stuff, one of the most common questions we see is, what's the name of your first pet? What's your first car? When's your birthday? What's your child's name? If we look at Facebook and things like that, the vast majority of those questions can be answered right away. In a matter of 10 or 15 minutes, scanning your social media feed answers the vast majority of the questions you have. So we want to limit not only the exposure of our network, but also the exposure of our own personal information about who we are. Now that becomes a challenge for all of us because in this day and age, everybody likes to share things. With the public availability of our services, how many of you have firewalls? Okay, I'm hoping pretty much everybody when we're coming to network security. How many of you have a rule in there that says any to any? Okay, there's usually one or two in there, but it's the rule that we should never have on a firewall. Because the any-to-any rule allows full pass-through, and at that point, what you have is not a firewall. With the firewall question, how many of you have firewalls provided by Comcast or Xfinity, where we're using the router as a firewall? That's fantastic news. I wonder how many are just not raising their hand on that. The firewall is our first step to exposing that visibility. And with the firewall, what are we preventing exposure of? Anybody? Open ports. So we're preventing exposure to the fact that we're running Apache, that we're running mail services, that we opened up a port for Xbox communications, or so on and so forth. And by keeping that that visibility down, we're preventing ourselves from becoming the target of general scans as we go through things. So it's all about opportunity with those lower grade attacks. If the opportunity is there, it's very easy to come into the situation and go, okay, let's try and exploit something because there's a public list of exploitable resources. In there, how many of you are currently connected to the hotel wireless or the MacTech wireless? Show of hands. Those of you that have your hands up, how many of you are communicating via VPN? Okay? That's another one of those visibility factors. When we're passing traffic through the hotel networks, a lot of times we're passing a lot of information that can easily be seen by everybody else. So adding the VPN is a first step to limiting that. Device management as administrator. How many of you administer other machines other than your own? Show of hands. Pretty much everybody. How many of you use a device management protocol where we're either doing distribution packages or MDM or something along those lines? When we do device management, it allows us to really lock down our end user machines to the extent that we want to. With our MDM services, if we're distributing them but not managing the preferences that go with them, we're not actually achieving the goals of device management. I see a lot of cases where machines get deployed, we have an MDM strategy, but what we're using it for is distribution of email accounts. We're not using it for our security section, preferences. As we set up device management, we need to have a plan as far as what protocols we want. So what's one of the very basic settings for security that we have on all of our machines? Anybody? Enabling SSL on our email accounts and things of that nature. Anything else? Passwords, what level of security we want. How many of you have auto screensavers turned on? Show of hands. Okay. How many of you manage that preference and tell people they have to turn it on and have to have it on a certain amount of time? You know, are we telling our users that if they're away from their machine for more than 5 minutes, that the screen automatically locks itself? I will tell you that so far in this conference, I've seen at least 15 machines left unattended without a screensaver on them, fully logged in. And this is not for 1 or 2 minutes. This is for an extended period of time. This is we take a break, somebody leaves their machine in the room, and they leave it not logged out. That is an immediate security concern, because a lot of us think about network security all the time and how we prevent people from getting into our networks. And yet when we have somebody that's already allowed access, we're not taking the measures to secure those individual devices. Are any of you familiar with NIST benchmarks? One person? Okay. So there is a publication that's released with pretty much every OS version that gives us a list of standard security protocols. Those protocols can be downloaded from here. Okay, and that's going to give you recommended settings for all of your different OSs and all of your iOS devices, as well as individual reasons for why they're being done and how we check to confirm compliance with them. Anybody that does any federal work and is working on machines that are distributed by the government, you're probably already familiar with these because they're required. They are score-based systems, so at the end of it, you get a score. With these, there is some delays because, as I said, they're a government thing. So as soon as you involve the government in anything, there's delays on it. The new iOS version is already published. They published it a few days ago. The new version of OS 10, I don't know whether it's out yet. I'd be willing to bet it's not because we're only about a week out. I would suggest all of you go to this and download the ones that are applicable to the OSs that you're using. So the different versions of iOS, the different versions of macOS, it will give you a little run sheet that you can go through and go, this works for my environment and this doesn't. And one of the things that's important to note in there is every single person in here, your network security concerns and threats and what's acceptable is completely different to you. It's not going to be the same for every one of you, so don't use this check sheet as, oh, I have to do it. For some of the people, it's going to work to use SSL on their mail. Some of you, it's not. Before you do SSL mail, we have to have support for it on the server. And if you don't have support for it on the server, then the first thing that we should be doing in our security concerns is getting that updated so we have that level of support with it. The next step in there is employee practices. Employees, as we talked about with the human element, and we'll get into the human element more on this, what we allow our employees to do can be one of the biggest issues to our security. So the example of machines being left out. How many of you require two-factor authentication on your machines? Okay, good number. How many of you have file vault on all of your machines? Passwords changing on a regular basis? No? How come? Why don't we change passwords on a regular basis? Say that again for me. Okay, can anybody in here tell me why changing passwords on a regular basis becomes less secure? The sticky note that goes onto the display, underneath the keyboard, underneath the MacBook. My favorite is when you see a video conference, and in the video conference is the password for their machine. So we have the problem that changing passwords on a regular basis. My other favorite that goes with passwords is it needs to be 32 characters long, 9 special characters, 3 uppercase letters. Can't be the last password that you used for the last 6 months, no repetitions, etc. How do we get around the password problem? Password managers. So what's the issue with password managers? We protect all of our passwords under a single password. The scenarios that we're moving towards now, in a lot of cases, are passwordless environments. And some of you, I'm sure, have already seen it. There's still a password on it, but it's not our primary level of security. What are we using instead? We're using multi-factor authentication for everything we do. And you'll notice in that I said multi-factor, not two-factor. So multi-factor means exactly what it sounds like, which is we have multiple tiers of recognition to allow us in. Those are divided into different elements. So we have something I have, something I am, something I do, and last but not least, somewhere I am. So all of those represent different aspects of authentication. What is something that I have? USB dongle that we plug into machines. What's something where I am? Okay, it's inside of the network or inside of a known location. It's restrictions by IP address. So when we start talking about access to our resources, one of the first ways that we can guard our network is restricting where people can access it from. So we talked about the firewall. We talked about how we should have our ports closed on the outside. When we add the somewhere I am, what we're saying is that if they're connecting from a known location, it's okay. We know that that's a location that has its own security vulnerabilities with it, because if we give a huge range of IP addresses and say that anybody that's connecting from Comcast is okay, does that work? No, but if we have a IP address for your home, how many of you have Comcast, cable modem, Xfinity, etc.? Show of hands. How many of you have had your IP address changed on your cable modem in the last 6 months? Generally, they stay the same. The reasons they change is because we reboot the modems and they stay down for an extended period of time. But when we're setting up our rules for outside access, we can frequently set it to say, okay, from our home, it's good. How many of you use VNC or ARD to manage your client preferences or client machines? Couple? Okay, those of you that don't, what are you using if your client right now contacts you and says, I have a problem, I need it fixed? Okay, TeamViewer, we're using a cloud-based system for it. Using direct connections like ARD and VNC has definite conveniences to it. Now, the thing with it is we want to make sure that those connections are guarded, and we're doing it from places that we know. One of the easiest ways to do this is with VPN systems. So as a general rule of thumb, when we set things up, outside access should be pretty much turned off. The only way that we want to allow access in is for somebody that's already authenticated. So what is something I am in the authentication side of things? Fingerprint identification, retinal scans, things like that. What's something I know? It's our password. It's also the secret questions that we get that are not really all that secret. You know, what is my first pet? As we go through that and we look at the connection methods and how we get in and what we authenticate with, how many of you are using SMS as a two-factor method? Okay. The funny thing about SMS is phone numbers are easily cloned. So SMS has been considered one of those things that while it's a nice step, it's not really overly secure. When we have Apple IDs and we try and log into a new location, what do we get? We get a prompt on a known device. How many of you have had the situation where you go to prompt for a new device, it pops up on the machine you're using and says, please enter this code that we just popped up on the exact same device you have? This is not an effective two-factor authentication method because you already have access to that machine. So the long and the short of this is we want to establish some practices that everybody gets used to. We want to get those two-factor authentications in, and we want to ensure that we're using those benchmarks that we had before that said, don't allow connections from the outside, don't allow our employees to use hotel wireless internets that can be sniffed, use the different sides of it, and through that, we get some security. Now, are those practices 100%? If we tell our employees that they can't connect for a hotel network, is that really going to do it? Who's the worst offender of this? Any guesses? Say that again? Yeah. So we have the CEOs. There's one that's even worse. It's all of us that are sitting in the room. Your IT personnel have the biggest problems with this. And it's because we're above that. I don't inadvertently click on the phishing links. I don't click on the Netflix account that says they want the updated passwords. So when we set those policies and we set the benchmarks, they need to apply to us as well. How many of you are using startup security on your machines? Okay? Just one. There's got to be more than that. When you boot your, well, you're using an iPad, so that doesn't apply. When you boot your machine and you try and boot it into single user mode, what happens? If I boot your machine into target disk mode, what happens? It works? Okay? Hopefully for the vast majority of people, the answer to this is no, because if I can boot your machine into single user mode, your password on your machine is now invalid because I now have root level access to the machine. So what we want to be seeing is when we're trying to boot the machines in a different manner, we're being prompted for a password on it. Not a perfect solution, but it's decreasing the convenience for getting through the machines. In some cases, it does, as long as you're using FileVault. Okay? There's a lot of cases where we don't use FileVault. How many of you have servers that run on Mac systems? Okay? Do you have FileVault turned on? Some of them? The general reason for the answer of no is if we have FileVault turned on and we have a machine that is always online, that reboots as after a power failure, what happens? It wants your FileVault password to continue the boot process. So lots of Mac servers out there are not protected by FileVault because we need them to reboot fully after a power failure. Going back to the network side of things, intrusion detection systems versus intrusion prevention systems. One is a detection and one's a prevention. Anybody, show of hands again, who's familiar with these two setups? Okay. All networks, when we start talking about artificial intelligence, should be running these in one shape or form or another. If you're using higher end firewalls, they have them already. These look for known threats that are different than your normal behavior. So what constitutes normal behavior on our network? Anybody, for you individually, what's normal? Say that again? HTTPS. Do you usually get on your computer at 3 o'clock in the morning? Although this is a room full of tech people, so the answer is probably yes. Do your CEOs get on at 3 o'clock in the morning? For a lot of people, the answer on that is no. With intrusion detection systems, what we're looking for is different access that somebody is not usually doing. An employee who does not normally access 80 gigs worth of client files in a single time from an outside source is considered suspicious, and that can throw a flag for an intrusion detection system. The big difference between these two systems is an intrusion detection system is only going to give you a notification that something's going on. That presents a small problem for us, because when do things go wrong on our network? From a security standpoint, it's not the middle of the day. It's usually 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, or sometime that's completely inconvenient for all of us. So I get a notification at 3 a.m. that says there's a concern on my network. What am I doing with it at that point? It's going to my email box that's probably not getting checked at all. I'll see it 4 hours later, at which point the problem has already presented itself and escalated to being something else. Intrusion prevention systems will immediately take that notification that we got and shut down the connection. This can be good or bad. Because if our CEO is actually trying to access client data at 3 o'clock in the morning and downloading 80 gigs from, I don't know, maybe he flew to Belize and started downloading that information, we just locked our CEO out of the network. What happens for the IT staff when the CEO gets locked out of the network? You get a phone call and it's not the nice one, he's mad and everything else, and now your weekend's interrupted. The question you need to look at is which one's worse? Is he going to be more upset because he got locked out of the network while he was trying to do something, or that all the client data has now been stolen from your company? It's a balancing act. At the moment, he's going to be more upset he was disconnected. But if the opposite was true, it would be even worse. We have to assume that at some point, though, people are going to get past this, because intrusion detection systems and prevention systems work on artificial intelligence and models of what's okay and what's not okay. So we can masquerade that, people end up getting through, and that's where we start talking about honeypots and honey nets. The greatest tool that we have in our toolbox from a security standpoint is time. Does that make sense to everybody? That from a time standpoint, if we have more time to respond to it, we can lessen the impact and damage that we're getting from it. So who here is familiar with honeypots and honey nets already? Okay, good number of people. A honeypot is a machine that allows somebody to connect to it and knowingly allows them to connect and gives them all kinds of fabricated things that they think are fantastic, and they will sit there and go, ooh, I found a file called passwords. How many of you have that file on your computer? Is it your passwords or somebody else's? We have, I've run into situations where we found in a penetration test scan after we got in, there was a file called accounts. And inside the file called accounts lists all the company credit card information, all the bank account information, all the administrative passwords and things like that. This is a gold mine for somebody that's trying to get into your network. They found all the data they could possibly want. Why look further if we already have the item that we've been seeking? So when we start talking about honeypots, what we're doing is we're setting up a dedicated machine on your network that is that gold mine find for the person that breaks into it. So when we set up our firewalls, one of the things that I will frequently do is I have an any rule that goes in, and the any rule redirects everybody onto this fabricated server. That all that happens is as soon as somebody connects to the server, it starts logging absolutely everything that they do. So we have two aspects of security that we look at. We have what's referred to the red team and the blue team. Is anybody familiar already with those phrases? So red team security is an offensive method of security, and blue team security is a defensive method of that security. They have two different goals that we're trying to achieve with them. On the blue team side of things, my goal is to keep you out. I don't want you in at all. On the red team side of things, my goal is to let you in, make you feel comfortable with everything that's happening, and I'm going to use the time that I have to launch an offensive back on the other side. Now, that does not mean that I'm trying to break into their network. Different countries and states have different legalities that go with it. Breaking into your offender's network is usually putting you in the same hot water that they're in. But what this does do is it allows me time to gather information about the person that's connected. It allows me to gather digital evidence, and it allows for prosecution down the road if you can manage to get that far. Prosecuting intrusions these days is very difficult. If those of you that said you'd been intruded on before, have you had any luck in prosecution in the other direction? Did you try? Any of you been victims of ransomware attacks? Consider yourselves fortunate, for those of you that didn't raise your hand. If you try and get the FBI involved, which is what they request for ransomware attacks, the first thing they tell you is don't pay. Okay, the reason we don't pay is we're, adding to the ability for them to want to do it again. That's the extent of their assistance. Unless you're a major Fortune 500 company, you're not going to get any help beyond that. So we want to gather that evidence, not necessarily for prosecution, but for what? Why are we gathering all this information? It's for our post-incident briefings on it, because we know where they're coming from now. And if we see a lot of attacks, say, coming from, Russia, then we can shut down all connections from the country of Russia into our firewall, except for ones that we know are good. So on the honeypots and honeynets, a honeypot is an isolated machine that we potentially direct all unknown traffic to that nobody should ever be connecting to. A honeynet is a fabricated network. It's a whole bunch of honeypots in the same thing, because if I connect into a corporate network, let's say I was going to try and hack, I don't know, MacTech or the Crown Plaza, and I get into the network and there's only one machine. What is that saying? I'm not really in the network. I gained limited access, and it'd be really weird if we had one machine that was publicly exposed that contained every piece of data that I could possibly imagine. So there's ways that we can do this. Method one with the honeypot is obviously we set up our own server. And we manage it ourselves and everything like that, and every now and then we throw stuff in it. The problem with that is it's not terribly convenient. How many of you have time to manage an entirely separate server that's not yours, that doesn't do anything? Nobody? So the way we can manage that is there's software out there that creates virtual honeypots. There are virtual machines that periodically it updates the email, adds new emails to it, adds new files to it, makes it look like there's regular traffic. There's also software-based systems that will make the honeypot networks. So there's a lot of different options out there. If you go into Google and search for either of those terms and look for software, here's the downside. Very few of that software runs on Mac. Most of it runs on Linux machines or Unix machines. How many of you are Windows users? Nobody? Couple? There's a few pieces of software out there that runs on Windows machines, but for those of us that are Mac admins, now that means we have to run a Windows machine, which is, you know, kind of like not something we usually want to deal with. So we'll skip that. Inside of this, after we have those initial planning steps to get information, we have to have a response plan. IT, when it comes to security and continuity of operations, really comes down to having plans. And what sits in these plans? Anybody? What do we have in a response plan? This is what happens when we have a notification of a breach. And the funny thing is a lot of times when we have plans, what do we do with them? I know what I do with a lot of plans I write up for myself. They go in a drawer somewhere, and I say, okay, when this happens, I'm going to use this. And then when it actually happens, I can't find the plan, because I stuck it somewhere that I would never forget where it was, and as soon as I needed it, I would know exactly where to find it. The problem is I made it 2 years ago, and it's sitting in a drawer underneath 800 other pieces of paperwork that say, I need to remember exactly where this is and use it all the time. If you don't have that experience already at least once, it means you're not writing a bunch of plans that you don't see for a year. So with our plans, there's a few things that go with it. How many of you are great at documentation? You're all liars. We're all terrible at documentation because we write documentation like it's for us. In order for our plans to be effective, they need to be communicable to other people that also have to execute it. Because if you're here and the breach is back home, the first thing that's going to happen with that breach is you're going to get locked out of the network. So we need people at home to be able to understand it too. So how many of you are single person environments? Meaning you manage all your clients yourself and everything like that. Do you have somebody at home that you can call to work with? All right, put your hands back up if you're single person environment. Look around the room. Look at the other people that have, I saw a few hands drop as soon as I said look around the room. Look around the room and look to the other people that are also operating a single person environment. You guys can help each other. Part of the reasons that we have these conferences is the socialization aspect and the network side of it. If you're a single person environment, there's going to come the day where you need somebody else to help you, be it either because something terrible happened or you're at MacTech. Unfortunately, we all go to the same events, so you'll probably all be there together going, oh crap, something bad happened. We want to look at our threat indicators. A threat indicator is something that occurs that tells us something's going to be wrong. I view this as situational awareness, and this is a matter of knowing what's going on around us. How many of you have gotten the emails, the days where suddenly in your email you start getting all of these bounce backs that occur, saying that you sent an email to somebody and it couldn't be delivered, but you never sent the email at all? This is a threat indicator. This tells us something is going wrong that we need to resolve. Now, in some cases, that means your email got spoofed. This isn't hard. It just means somebody set the reply to address to be yours, and now you're getting all kinds of bounce backs on it. But it's something that we watch out for to see that a problem is happening. And if we're not paying attention to those problems that happen and the indicators that something's wrong, we're going to miss it, and it's suddenly going to become a major deal as far as that problem. How many of you see drastically decreasing hard drive space sometimes? Usually right after an OS update, suddenly everything drops on our machine. Time machine caching, where the time machines start doing, or where it does its indexing, and the index file grows to massive amounts. Your antivirus files that suddenly just keep magnifying in size and growing. This was a problem with OS X server and its mail client for a while. These are indicators that something's wrong. How do we know when things like that are starting to go wrong? Anybody? Any of you use Watchman? They have a booth out front. It'll give you indicators for, oh, our hard drive is suddenly filling up. This could be an indicator of a problem. One of the things that I frequently put on machines as an indicator is a drastic change in storage volume, available storage, in one direction or another. Why am I monitoring for an increase of available space? Any guesses? Say that again? Yeah, so somebody plugging in a new drive that's not supposed to be there. But what happens if I go into a server and I start deleting a massive number of files? Our available space increases. So setting alarms when suddenly your volume changes in available space by 80 gigs can be a nice threat indicator for you, that something is occurring. So the human element. I'm going to show a picture in a minute. And if it's a picture of your machine, I apologize in advance for using you in my presentation. When we said that the IT people in the room are frequently the biggest problem, oh, did I take the, there it is. This is a perfect example of that. Where is this photo taken? It's taken at the hotel bar. This photo was taken yesterday. This machine sat on the bar for 5 minutes while I watched. I assume the owner of the laptop went to the bathroom, which is fine. But where's the least secure spot that we can be leaving our machine fully logged in? At a tech conference at the bar. Because when we're at a tech conference, everyone here is the perfect person to be like, oh, I know that person. I'm going to lock their machine while they're gone. I did it to JD, who's I don't know if JD's in the room. He's probably not. But JD left his iPad out. First thing I did when he left was put a password on it. I enabled guided access and threw a password on the machine. Not to be malicious, but as a, hey, maybe don't do this. So when we start thinking about our own actions, when the question comes up during a presentation, let's say you're in a day-long workshop, the phrase that shouldn't be coming out of your mouth at any point is, can I leave my laptop here? You know, room's locked. Great. And even if the room's not locked, okay, we have a level of trust for each other. How many of you know every person in this room? Nobody? How many of you have a friend that if they left their laptop open next to you with Facebook logged in would reach over and go, doo-doo, and type a nice little post for it? I would certainly be that person. There's no question about it. It's not malicious, but it's the knowledge that that can easily become an issue where it was malicious. Now, how many of you said VPN access turned on? How many of you have that VPN trigger in your nav bar in the upper right-hand corner that you click it and it connects to the VPN and doesn't ask for a password? Okay, I do. That's when you check off the box that says VPN, it's the easiest way to connect to it. What happens when this machine has that and is left open sitting at the bar and I go over and connect to the VPN? Where am I? I'm inside of their corporate network with whatever access I potentially wanted. When I go to get prompted for a password, what do I have? Keychain access, which if they already authenticated the keychain for me, what happens? It autofills absolutely everything for me. I may not be able to see their passwords, but it'll fill everything in for me. When you connect to a server, you have that wonderful little box that says save this password. How many of you use it? I'll raise my hand. I do it. It's easy. I've got 900 passwords I have to remember. And all of them are different because I'm required to change them every 30 days. And as a result, all I do is I throw a new number at the end of it. How many of you do that? I got to change my password. Okay, previous one ended in a 5, the new one ends in a 6. This is the worst thing that we can do from a security standpoint. All right, post-incident briefings. The one thing that I'm going to go over on the post-incident briefing, I've got the big yellow screen in front of me that's saying I'm running out of time, is that we have to have them. If we take all of that information that we learned and then we do absolutely nothing with it at all, what do we gain from it? Nothing. We learn from the failures we have. Failures are not a bad thing. It's okay when we have a breach of the network and something's wrong. It teaches us what not to do next time. Granted, we want to limit how much that happens, but when things bad happen, we want to take something away from it that's actually usable that makes it a success. So everybody on your team, those of you that didn't have the one-person operation hand up, we need to meet with everybody in our group, and potentially we need to meet with the executives. Why are we meeting with the executives? Because that's always extremely painful. We need buy-in from those executives. They control our budgets. They tell us what we can spend money on and what's going to be okay and what's not. So when we do our post-incident briefings, as much as we don't want to tell our bosses, oh, by the way, I know you put me in charge of security, but we had a big breach and everybody stole our stuff, that's information we need to share, and we need to explain to them why it happened. Not only why, but how, and hopefully when it happens, you get to say, remember that report I gave you a year ago that said I wanted more resources and I wanted to add a new firewall and you told me no because it was too expensive? Well, this is why we should have done it. I wouldn't necessarily take that approach when you talk to them, but having that resource that says we tried to fix this before it happened is always a good thing. My time just changed. I suddenly got extra time. All right, question and answers for the stuff we covered. I know we're limited in time as far as how much we can actually get into these, but I hope from a security standpoint it gives you at least some ideas as to how to start doing initial protections. Any questions about anything? Yep. So my first response back to that would be depend on what's on their systems. You know, the more valuable the content is that's on their systems, we don't necessarily look at the number of people and the number of end users. We got to look at their budget. I'm a big fan of the Meraki product line. The problem with the Meraki, there's at least one person go, yes, it's awesome. I like the Meraki product line because it is manageable from anywhere. If I put all of my clients on Meraki firewalls, I can get all of them on a single dashboard at the same time. I get a big map that pops up that says everything's healthy and things like that. The downfall of the Meraki product line is they do have annual licensing, which is something that, to be honest, if we look at all the different software packages, hardware, and things like that, everything's moving in that direction anyways. I mean, those of you that are buying, who has an iPhone 11 right now? Okay, when you bought it, you had this wonderful option for your Apple Care, that instead of your Apple Care being a 3-year program that you could pay $2.99 a month every month for the rest of your life and have Apple Care forever. So a lot of, I was at dinner last night, somebody is now, their software license package is now billed by the hour of use as opposed to an annual fee, which for me is an awesome idea because if I don't use software, I don't want to pay for it. But it does have a license fee. With that side, the MX64 from Meraki is a great small business firewall. If they're a super small client, the teleworker gateways that Meraki makes are also a good choice. One thing to know about the Meraki line when it comes to the firewalls, there's 2 different levels of licensing. One is an advanced security license, and one is a standard enterprise license. The advanced security license for Meraki includes an intrusion detection system and prevention system. So a lot of things all in the same package. With the Meraki line, the other thing that's really nice is that you get a lifetime warranty on the product as long as you have a license in place for it. Downfall is you stop paying the license, it now becomes a really cool doorstop and does absolutely nothing else. Does that answer your question? Okay. You can. If you watch a webinar, you can get a free, and I think it comes with a 3-year, is it a 3-year standard license? And if you stop over at the CTCI booth, we'll happily give you a link so we get credit for sending you to the webinar and your free stuff. And then after that, we'll call you once a month to be like, are you ready to buy more Meraki product? All right, any other questions?
I've got one. Do you have any advice on which hardware to use? I've noticed that IPS systems have a pretty big performance hit on some hardware. Have you noticed that some is better than others?
I honestly run all mine on VM machines. They're all virtual machines. They only spin up when the detection's coming in. So I actually use the Meraki firewalls with the intrusion detection systems and prevention systems, and then route the traffic based on that over to it. So it triggers a script that spins up the VM. So all of us are used to that delay when we're connecting to a network from the outside. And that during that delay on the networks that I set up for this, that's when the VMware is spinning up to turn on the system. So for the honeypot machines, I most of the time will make my own systems, and I do them inside a VM. That way they're not consuming resources when they're not needed.
What about reducing performance across the WAN, like download speeds, for example?
That gets difficult, and a lot of that comes down with the firewalls you're using and the routers you're using, because for me, I use traffic shaping on it, and I set a maximum on that connection. And that's another way. We talked about the best thing you can have is time. So if we slim down the bandwidth that's coming through, we gain ourselves additional time, because we're all used to the ups and downs and fluctuation of traffic speed. So we can use traffic shaping to go, okay, after a minute or after X amount of data transfer, drop the speed in half. So a good router will solve that issue for you for limiting the WAN traffic.
Yeah, I was going to say, not so much for the enterprise, obviously, but for this small office, home office, in a small business environment, the Synology routers, their new build of their intrusion protection threat prevention system will perform up to gigabit speeds, both down and up, which is impressive in a $200 device. Yeah,
I'm not overly familiar with the Synology devices because it's not something I use, but for the person who asked about the small client, if it's $200,
it's really impressive.
Anything for $200 is great, and the big thing with that is if you don't currently have anything in place, while the $200 device may not be the perfect solution, any solution is better than no solution at all. It's kind of like the person that has no firewall. I would encourage you to go to Best Buy and buy the $50 Netgear firewall, so at least you have something in the mix that's there.
In an actual breach scenario where we have client data that is leaked, who are we required to notify? FBI, police?
So it depends on what the data is. If you're dealing with HIPAA data and things like that, the response to that is completely different. From a legality standpoint, you're not technically required to notify anybody. You don't have to. I would avoid contacting your local police department, for starters. I don't know where everybody lives, but I live in Rutland, Vermont, which we have a population in Rutland, Vermont of about 20,000. And our local police department is used to dealing with things like, I'm a farmer and somebody tried to steal my cow. If I called them and went, somebody broke into my network, they go, what, you're what? So if you're going to call anybody and it's a general client level data and it's not secure information or anything like that, your local FBI field office is usually where you're going to want to call. Every area has a local FBI field office. It's just a matter of how far that field office happens to be away. Even, Podunk, Iowa, hopefully nobody lives in a town called Podunk, Iowa, has an FBI field office assigned to that area. And FBI has a full cybersecurity division that deals with threats. They're going to have you fill out some paperwork saying the incident occurred. What will happen from it from there? Probably nothing. It's kind of like when you say you lost your wallet and you call the police department. They're like, oh, okay, file a report. Does that answer your question? Sort of.
That's awesome. That's all we have time for right now. Everybody, please, a warm thank you for Avery Chipka.